Congressional source to start us off tonight is the second highest ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee. Congressman Jasmine Crockett of Texas is here, and it's great to have you on set with us. When it came to what the president told me today, that he was not personally aware of the Ghislaine Maxwell prison transfer, do you believe that?
I don't think that there's a lot that the president is personally aware of. So him being clueless is on brand. But in this particular set of circumstances where he is personally looking out for himself, I absolutely believe that he was knowledgeable about this. I'm sure that this didn't happen behind his back, and clearly he is not complaining about it. That's one thing that he didn't do. He didn't say, I'm the commander-in-chief and somehow they did this and they did not notify me. He did not seem like he was upset. So in my opinion, he probably did know about it.
And what did you make of his description of the conversation that the Deputy Attorney General had with Ghislaine Maxwell, saying that essentially he doesn't want people to get hurt by the release of the materials?
Again, he is concerned about himself. We know for a fact that he is in the Epstein files. And personally, I don't think it's a big secret that that's the reason that they wanted to cover up. It's the reason that the House had to flee D.C. as they're talking about the Texas Democrats that are standing for democracy. They decided to flee D.C. trying to avoid the Epstein files and hoping that the base would forget about it when we come back at the beginning of September. What they did not anticipate is that while they may have the numbers, it is the Democrats that always have the brains, and they did not anticipate that this particular oversight subcommittee would actually be able to get the subpoenas necessary. They voted in a bipartisan way, and that was before we actually left. It's just that Comer is just now signing off.
Yeah, and on those subpoenas, does that include, do you know, the transcript or audio recording of Todd Blanche's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell?
It should not, because in my opinion, this was an issue that they voted on prior to the creation of that. Okay. So it's hard for you to say, give me something that doesn't exist at that time. Now, considering the fact that Comer took a little while before he actually issued the subpoena for the files, then that may ultimately end up being included, because by the time he did the issuance of it, he may have said, give me every single thing. But at the time that the motion was voted on, that was something that hadn't even been created.
Do you want that to become public? The transcript?
I think that Congress needs all the files, period, and then we can go from there. Do I trust Todd Blanche? Definitely doesn't trust him on the way that the president trusts him. In fact, he talked about how great he was, but the last time that I checked, he actually lost that case for the president in New York. So there were definitely a group of jurors that did not believe that he was this great, incredible attorney that was to be trusted.
Speaking of attorneys, you were previously a public defender.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney fighting the release of the grand jury materials, do you think that is the right position, that those grand jury materials should not be released?
I absolutely agree, actually. As a former criminal defense attorney, and ultimately as someone who really does believe in foundational things around our democracy as well as our criminal justice system, the secrecy of the grand jury process is something that is pivotal to our criminal justice system. And while everything is falling apart around us, I absolutely believe that the judges are making the right decision. This is something that's gone up in front of a judge before, and the judge said no, because that is the law. And I do think that there is a greater risk to a lot of people, not just the victims, but those that participated in the grand jury, if those files are to be released.
And we've heard from these victims, these survivors, some of them have been writing letters to the courts condemning the Justice Department's request to unseal this testimony, which you said that you agree it shouldn't be unsealed. One of them wrote in part, "I'm not some pawn in your political warfare. What you've done and continue to do is eating at me every day after day as you help to perpetuate this story indefinitely." But would a full public congressional hearing also have the same outcome and effect on these victims, do you believe?
Not necessarily. It just depends on how we go about it. I mean, you know, again, the grand jury process is a little different, and it's a lot different in a lot of different ways. And so saying that, no, you don't get the grand jury, but saying, yes, you can have the files. Ultimately, think about the cases down in Georgia. We know that special grand jury that they pulled together ultimately they made recommendations of, I don't know how many people should be indicted, but ultimately that's not where the state decided to go. So their case files that they actually had for the cases looked a little different than the wide breadth that they had as it relates to the grand jury. So some of these people may have said, hey, listen, I will supply this information for this part of the process, but ultimately they may have decided that they didn't want to go forward on different parts of it, as well as, you know, that when it comes to Trump, people tend to have targets on their backs. And even some of those investigators that were involved, we see how he's treated those over at the DOJ that were involved in investigating him. So some of those people may not have ultimately been involved in the overall case. And I just don't think that it's worth the risk. And I don't think that we should twist the law, even if I am on the side of kind of like full transparency. At the end of the day, I'm a lawyer first, and I want to make sure that we preserve what grand juries are supposed to be, which is secret.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction that you're making there when we're hearing some people in your party argue the opposite. And speaking of your party and control of Congress, obviously we're watching this massive fight play out in Texas. You were actually a state rep the last time we saw Democrats in Texas leave. Yeah. That was over voting rights legislation that was being put into place there that Democrats disagreed with. They left the state to protest what was happening, but ultimately that did get passed and Republicans were able to get that across the line. Don't you believe that's going to be the same outcome in this situation?
Not necessarily, but only time will tell. And first of all, when we go back to what happened in 2021, a lot of people forget how bad that bill was. And ultimately, what passed was a bad bill. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But they were specifically going after souls to the polls. And when we decided to shine a light on that, that actually came out of that. And so we were able to get rid of some of the bad stuff that ultimately would have been in that bill. So we did some good. Now, ultimately, as it relates to this map, we're talking about a tight timeline. Texas has one of the earliest, if not the earliest, primary. I actually have to file for re-election starting in November. So I believe the timeline is that we have to know our lines by maybe October. So the time is ticking, and it's ticking away really fast. That is why you see the Attorney General as well as the governor getting very aggressive, because you can't just change the lines and you can't change the primary without the Democrats being there and providing a quorum. So it kind of depends. And there are two chambers. And over 20 years ago, or approximately 20 years ago, when there was a break in the quorum, it was the Senate. They technically have the numbers right now in the Texas Senate to also break quorum.
So do you believe that ultimately that they will be able to be successful here in delaying this at least further past, will Democrats be able to stay out of the state that long, basically?
We will see. We will see. I don't have a crystal ball, but I am saying that at least we know that it's not an indefinite amount of time, unlike what we were dealing with the voting bill, because he kept saying, I'll call special session after special session. They don't really care what happens so long as Donald Trump doesn't have a check for the second half of his term. And if they run out of time, then that's a problem for them.
You know, you talked about that voting bill being changed by Democrats leaving. Is there a compromise in this redistricting that they want to do that you believe would be at least more palatable for Democrats?
I don't think so. I'll be perfectly honest. I've been engaged in litigation since 2021 over the current lines because they're problematic as they are. They just made them even worse.
Yeah, well, on that case, actually, this is an interesting point because you're a plaintiff in that 2021 case. If you win, what is to stop Texas Republicans from just passing the map that they're trying to pass right now over that map?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think the court is actually delaying their decision because we actually engaged in the trial. We just got done with the trial. And literally about 2.5, 3 weeks later, it was the DOJ that was sending this letter down in which the state was taking a completely different opinion. For the last 4 years, they said, no, these are great maps. They're race neutral. Don't do anything to change them. We want to keep them. And then all of a sudden they said, never mind, we want to change the maps. They're terrible and they're wrong. And they're citing this case that came out in 2024 from the Fifth Circuit. But the reality is that we just went through the trial, and that wasn't even but a month ago, and the state still had the same position. So they are twisting themselves into a pretzel to appease this wannabe Hitler that we have in the White House, but I think he's actually creating a bigger problem. I think people now, first of all, understand what gerrymandering looks like and why it's so problematic. I think people are finally waking up to the fact that Texas is a majority-minority state. So when we say that it's not really a red state, but we just are a voter-suppressed, voter apathy, and underinvested state, people now are starting to understand that, especially when the only way that he could get these seats was by depressing the voices of black and brown people in this majority minority state. So I think this is going to backfire in a historic way. I am really excited
Would
that—
you support a national ban on gerrymandering?
I would.
So if it came up, you'd vote for that?
I would absolutely support a national ban on gerrymandering because I believe in fairness.
You and the president often talk about one another. He actually brought you up in an interview this morning. I want everyone to listen to that.
Of course he did.
I mean, when you have low IQ people like Crockett, I wonder if she's any relationship to the late, great Davy Crockett, who was a great gentleman. I wonder if she's got any relationship to Davy Crockett, the great old Davy Crockett. But you have this woman, Crockett, a very low IQ person. Somebody said the other day she's one of the leaders of the party. I said, you got to be kidding.
Davy Crockett did die at the Alamo in 1836, but I wonder, what is your reaction to what the president said about you?
Listen, he has nothing of substance to contribute when it comes to critiquing me. There's a lot that I talk about. For instance, we've just had an entire conversation about gerrymandering and redistricting and why it's bad. And instead of him being able to elaborate on the fact that I'm unable to make a cogent argument or something like that, and then back into his argument that I'm low IQ, he just knows how to throw that insult. But it's a common insult when it comes to people of color. He just threw the same exact insult as Charlemagne the God. And so I want people to see him and understand who he is. This is a person that has a problem with people of color, period. I don't care how many black MAGA out there with their hats. I want to be clear, when we look at who it is that he's kicking out of this country as people of color, when we look at who he always disrespects and says that they are low IQ, even though when you look at his cabinet, this has to be the most incompetent cabinet we have ever had in the history of this country. When we're talking about people that literally have the ability to drop bombs or order that bombs be dropped or make recommendations that bombs be dropped, and they literally don't know how to get the signal chat right. So we're talking about low IQ individuals, but so long as they say that this guy is their guy, and usually if they work for a certain news network, that's the only qualification that's necessary. I've got news for the president. I am not going anywhere. No matter how many squiggly lines they draw in the state of Texas, I will be back and I will be on his behind and making sure the real accountability that the American people are demanding, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents, that it is had when the Democrats take control of this House in the midterms.
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, great to have you. Thanks for your time tonight.
Good to be with you.